And in the meantime, for the rest of us in here, as we wait for the results, we'll have a panel discussion, a final one for the day. The title is ICO Best Practice. What does it take to conduct a successful and compliant ICO? So right on topic. The panel will be moderated by John Hucker from Swiss Finance and Technology Association. Presides it. John, please come up. Moderation chair is waiting for you. And then I would like to ask the panelists to come up and fill in the seats in the order that I announced them. Nicolai Oster, head of ICO Bitcoin Suisse. Welcome. Yes, it will show up in a minute. You'll have a seat right there. Then Michael Terpin, we have not found you. So if you are in the audience somewhere, please come as quick as possible to the technology booth to get mic'd up. No, sorry, you need the microphone. Please get a quick microphone. And then I'll continue. Arie Levy Cohen, president of Blockhaus. Andreas Glarner, partner at MME Legal. And this one we'll keep free. Perfect. Michael Terpin will be joining in just a minute. Maybe John, let me just quickly ask you a question.
Sure.
How do you feel about Swiss Crypto Valley and especially seeing this ICO Summit taking place in the heart of the financial center?
I think it's great. The ICO topic's been a really great lighthouse for what's going on with fintech broadly in Switzerland. And I think it's really connected with the history of what works so well in Switzerland, but also excited people about the future. So great that the ICO Summit has brought it down here to Paradeplatz.
And Swiss Finance and Technology Association has been doing a lot of work in the ecosystem. I remember when it was still a very small association over some beers a few years ago, and now it's just been gaining so much dynamic.
I think, again, the overall fintech and blockchain ecosystem in Switzerland is taking off with all the potential we thought that it had. So, yeah, more to come.
It's a good spot to be in. We are complete. And have a great panel, all of you.
Great. I guess it's over to me now. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, panelists, for joining us here today. As was mentioned, I'm the president of the Swiss Finance and Technology Association. I'm a banker by background, so some of this blockchain and ICO stuff is a bit new to me. But I think that's the idea here today, is to have a bit of an outsider ask some of the more pointed questions about how do we make sure that best practices are being followed in the ICO market. So I'm sure many of you are familiar to the audience, but why don't we just do a quick round of introductions and you can talk about your role within the ICO process. Nicolai?
My name is Nicolai Oster. I'm the head of ICO at Bitcoin Suisse. Bitcoin Suisse is a financial intermediary based in Zug. We've been based there since 2013, been regulated since 2014. Our roles with ICO is the financial aspect of an ICO for both pre-ICO to post-ICO, where we take the ICO entities through this amazing financial tool, which an ICO is.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael Terpin. I'm a serial entrepreneur in technology and marketing. I'm probably best known for starting Market Wired, which is the third largest news wire in the world. I've been in the blockchain space since 2013. And my firm, Transform Group, has worked with over 150 blockchain companies and 45 ICOs as advisor and PR firm and some other services. I also started Bit Angels.
Thanks, Michael. Arie?
Hi, I'm here as CEO and founder of Blockhaus, which is a blockchain-based investment banking practice for the benefit of doing token generation events.
Thanks, Arie. Andreas?
Yeah, I'm a tech lawyer from background. I'm part of MME's crypto team. We're a full corporate law firm with a currently slightly strong focus on blockchain projects. We've been engaged in this field for the past 4 years. Currently have a team of 14 attorneys dedicated to blockchain issues.
Great. Well, I want to start it off with getting right to the point. In the last couple of months, I've been amazed how many times that people have come up to me and said, John, you should do an ICO. First of all, I didn't know enough about them to really take that seriously. But now that I've gotten, made a few more trips to Zug and gotten to know things, I'm starting to get the hang of it. The one thing that still makes me wonder is, are we at a point yet with ICOs where you can go through one and still sleep at night? Are there best practices that you can follow that make this something that is a smooth, predictable process now? Does anyone want to start with that?
I can start with that. If you're not in a rush, if you are doing things proper, then yes, of course, you should be able to sleep. You'll probably not get much of sleep doing an ICO, but that's a different story. But it's definitely important to be aware and be nervous about the different risk factors that is involved by doing an ICO. And by that, protect yourself best possible, protect your contributors, investors in the long run, and protect the prosperity of your project.
Great.
Well,
over to you, Michael.
I was going to say we're 4 years in right now since the first ICO, which we helped work with Cohen in August of 2013. And so I think we're getting past the early days of the Wild West and maybe into the horse and buggy phase. But there are now numerous law firms who have had experience with dozens of ICOs apiece, some even more than 100. And I think different jurisdictions are getting a handle on what's a security, what's not a security is important in the U.S. Other things are important in different jurisdictions. And those are really the main things. And then there's other best practices for how to raise money and how to market them.
Yeah, I do believe that what you've both said is probably the whole lot of the story. It's true. You shouldn't go fast. You should take your time, do it right. I've been following what you're doing, and I believe that there is a way to do it legally. And yes, there's a way to sleep at night pretty well. I agree with you as well that we're in sort of the tail end of the wild, wild west, but we're not done yet. There's still some madness going on. But there is something that is arising from this tail end, which is there's a set of standards, a language that is being written and created by MME, and it is going to give Switzerland an opportunity to lead. You started the conversation by saying that Switzerland has all the earmarkings of why blockchain here is so fitting, and it goes much deeper than just business. It's a gestalt of the Swiss people that sits here that has a very close affinity to the blockchain. And what Luca and Andreas and the crypto team at MME have done is create a way to define a compliant, legal, and regulatorily acceptable way of saying, what is it that we have here? Mm-hmm. And I'll invite you to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I personally don't get much sleep at night lately, but that's more because we're not involved in one busy. ICO, because in multiple. But principally, I think the question is, I think we never have been in a wild, wild west. Always, I think if you look at ICOs, how they're being done around the world, the structures are similar. So I think Switzerland has one certain particularities, but other jurisdictions have also interesting paths they follow. And I think every law firm which is involved in the field tries to do it the safest and the best way, and according to the state of the art, which is developing over time. And having said that, I think yes, you should be able to sleep, but it's nothing for someone who has a very light sleep. As we've seen in China, regulators can jump in. Regulators can also change their minds. They can get new opinions. So I think we still, there's many open questions. And
I very much agree with in Switzerland, it's never really been a Wild West. Cryptocurrencies in general and how we handle it also from the side of Bitcoin Suisse, we've since 2014 handled it as a monetary business. It's money we're transmitting, it's compliant, it's regulated, and that's why I think the best quality projects and the safest are being created here in Switzerland. So we have never really had this wild west attitude here.
No, I fully agree, and I also agree on the point you mentioned earlier that it is about taking the time to do it properly. Mm-hmm. We face a lot of projects which are very interesting from the content side, but which are in a terrible rush. And obviously, there are always good reasons why your project must move on within 1 month after the first idea you had. But from a legal point of view, it makes sense to do it properly, to take things a bit slower, to allow a structure to really be put into place before you start collecting funds.
I was going to save it till later in the discussion, but we've talked a number of times already about why Switzerland. Do you all agree that Switzerland's probably the best place to do an ICO in the world right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
No, but
Go Switzerland. Hope Schweiz.
you have.
We have to export what Switzerland has here to the world.
I'm not Swiss, so I have to be Swiss about saying what the
I'm not.
jurisdiction is.
I'm not Swiss.
I'm not Swiss either, but I'm a resident. I moved,
Yeah.
and I'm living here. And if we don't do this,
Yeah.
Switzerland will lose it. It's theirs now.
Yep.
This is for Switzerland to lose. And we have an opportunity of delivering what you have here to 4 billion people, not just the first world, where it's nice to have. For the rest of the world, what you guys have here is the difference between participating in an economy and not.
Right.
Eating or not, feeding your kids or not. So for sure, Switzerland has to lead.
And besides being absolutely wonderful.
Sorry, that opened a can of worms. Quickly to Nicolai first.
Yeah, but then besides having absolutely wonderful nature, you have a stability, legal-wise, regulatory stability. You have precedents. That is a very unique thing about Switzerland. Nothing changed 180 degrees overnight, and that is very important to remember. You pay a higher price, but you also pay the price for stability, and stability we like.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have Ethereum here, and so like that sort of seized the crown to start with, but you shouldn't be complacent because there are a lot of other folks who are chasing. Gibraltar's obviously being very aggressive. Liechtenstein has always been a jurisdiction that has been fairly friendly. Luxembourg, in the Caribbean, there's a number of places. BVI has been very active, although it's cut out of business for a while from the hurricane. Cayman Islands. Mauritius now is all of a sudden getting very aggressive. They're calling themselves Ethereum Island. So I think the most important thing from a marketer and from an investor point of view and from an entrepreneur are all the pieces together. So it's great to have the points of law and the money transmission and things like that. It's great to have tax strategy. There's a lot of zero tax jurisdictions, but you also have to have the whole picture. You obviously have a huge amount of providers here, which is a tremendous thing. You also have to make sure that the central banks don't step in like Isle of Man did at one point and say, wait, we don't want these people here. So got to be all together.
So you're hitting on a few of the points I wanted to lead into. What does it take to maintain that leadership position and to really realize the potential for Switzerland? Arie?
Unity, cooperation to compete, co-opetition.
Yep.
We need to all cooperate and give ourselves an opportunity to give this ecosystem an opportunity to flourish here. Crypto Valley Labs, which is an initiative that Andreas and MME and Lakeside Partners are working on, is trying to materialize that opportunity.
Yep.
The communication amongst peers that do similar things should be improved.
And then the most important thing is not to stretch the balloon so it breaks. It's being friendly towards the regulators, meeting them on the halfway, being compliant, AML, KYC, going towards connecting the established traditional world with this new crypto world. By that, the balloon will in the end be looser and looser and looser, and that gives more and more space. And I think that is very important for us in Switzerland to focus on, because dropping this amazing, revolutionizing financial tool, which an ICO is, about acquiring capital and utilizing a whole community, it would be a shame to push the regulators away, push the legislators away, and get it banned. It would be a tragedy, in my opinion.
I think one of the main advantages Switzerland has, being a very small country, and traditionally having a very low hierarchy level between authorities and the community, is that there's a good contact between the regulator and the service providers, different law firms working in that field. There's a good contact, a constant communication, and blowing that up for no reason, that would be endangering Switzerland as a position. So this contact is very important.
Yeah, it's amazing to compare how close you are to Bern, either in Geneva or Zug or wherever you may be doing an ICO. Compare that to Silicon Valley, the distance to Washington and the type of connection you're probably going to have in a place like the US with the regulator, and then ultimately the type of troublesome situations that's led to already with the US and blockchain.
Yeah, the advantage of the Swiss regulator really being they probably have a very high know-how by now on blockchain technology, on ICOs and token functionalities. So they're really up to speed. And compared to other, at least within the European area, regulators, I think their knowledge is far beyond anything else. Obviously, there's some offshore jurisdictions like the traditional ones, which are definitely competing, which are very interesting for certain projects. But with regard to reputation, they face more difficulties.
One thing that brings to mind is I came from the private banking industry and came to Switzerland after the financial crisis, when there was a lot of work to be done to rebuild some of the reputational damage around how banking secrecy was handled. Do you see there being any potential risk about mishandling of ICOs where something similar could happen? Is that a potential risk?
There are risks in any business where there's exchange of value. And there are no differences in the risks that you're taking in buying an initial coin offering or a token generation an event or a token sale than the one that you would take when you buy an IPO or a private placement or a hedge fund or a black box that Warren Buffett put together 40 years ago that ended up being a brilliant machine, but you didn't know. So there's some risks that you are taking.
What about the risk of, we mentioned China briefly, what about the risk of Switzerland doing everything right, but other countries deciding that this is something they're going to block or interfere with?
I think that is of absolute risk. As Andreas just said, regulators can change their mind overnight for reasons that have nothing to do with their intentions.
Right.
Fair enough. I think we also have to kind of review a bit the China decision. At the end of the day, most jurisdictions around the world tend to focus on their own territory. There's some exceptions, which we all know of, but which kind of have a broader understanding of the principle of territoriality than most others have. But China, for example, doesn't. China is very much focused on its own jurisdiction. It does not want anyone else to interfere within China, and it does not want to interfere within other jurisdictions. So the China ban is a China internal ban only related to companies doing ICOs in China. So this may happen in other jurisdictions as well, but it would not be necessarily, or most likely not be touching Switzerland or other countries which do ICOs.
And it may not necessarily be that the entire reason why China did what it did had anything to do with Bitcoin in the first place.
Right.
There are alternative reasons that are pushing China to
like
do
the
something.
election in a couple of weeks.
And or, for example, flight capital.
Yeah. So China banned Facebook. China banned Google. You want to look at their stock prices, see how they've done since the bans?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to change the direction a bit and get back to ICOs themselves, because it is ICO Best Practice that we're here to talk about. Michael, we were discussing some of the topics in how we were going to stage this, and I mentioned how we'd probably talk about communications last and how that was a bit of a disservice. I understand sort of the 4 or 5 steps in an ICO to be team and business model, technical, legal, audit, and then communications. Would you argue that the storytelling and framing of the picture of an ICO is more important than 5th on that list?
Well, I think you need all the pieces to be successful. You can have a great story and a lousy team, and you're not going to do well. You can have a great team and not tell the story well, or have it, trying to tote a bad product around. I'm old enough to have lived through the entire arc of the .com era. And it created some great companies. Google came out of the flames, eBay, Amazon, largest company in the world. But, there was also Flake.com. There was a community for breakfast cereal lovers that blew up immediately. I think that you're right now sort of at the end of the beginning. And the next wave is going to have some larger companies that are saying, as you've seen with the Kick ICO and some other larger companies saying, whoa, I can actually go in and take a product, like Kickstarter, except it then has a value on the aftermarket. This is something that never happened before. Just like in the 90s, you could go in when it was new and say, I'm going to have an internet division. I'm going to get 10 times the valuation of my brick and mortar that's actually profitable. So these things tend to equalize. But, investors believe in stories, right? I mean, they believe that Facebook is worth 35x revenues and some other company is worth 135x. That's what fundamental judgment is about, and that's really where the message to the investors, and it's interesting because you've got so many mixed things. Countries around the world still haven't figured out if Bitcoin's a currency, commodity. It varies from nation to nation. And here you have something that is essentially treated by many times both investors and consumers as a security, but 90% of them don't meet it. So this is the wild world we're living in, and this is something that has to be identified, I think, first and foremost in the pre-sale, because the best practices these days are to find the people who actually have the Bitcoins in the ether and communicate to them. And that's a different phase of messaging. It's getting the right advisors. It's then getting sort of a big bang out right at the heart of your pre-sale, not your public sale, so that the big whales hear about you. And then you go to shows like this and you meet them, and by the time you get up to your public sale, you already have a head of steam in back of you, a couple of big articles in financial press, and people on the board that are going to show that you have a great brand, a great product, and therefore people want to buy it.
I find it interesting when I talk to people who do what you do, and I realize that most of you look at the future and divine what it should look like, and then go back to the present time and weave the story to connect the future with the present. And it's fascinating that this is how we created the reality that we're in this place to begin with. You add a few dimensions to this comment, but there's a sense that we're building economies, not just applications.
Right.
There's a sense that we're building property, which is what the BCP classification is. There is a sense that there are opportunities across economies to build avatars of all of these things and all of their concomitant applications. So the need for structure that allows for that sustainability to grow is essential for this to continue being successful. And I think that here, this is happening already with a certain sense of advantage over other jurisdictions. Yeah. To piggyback again.
And governance is a big word because, ICO governance a year ago meant that you didn't run off with the money. Now it's like, what are you doing with the money? Are you actually going ahead of your benchmarks?
But these benchmarks have never not been a part of doing business.
Yep.
It just isn't a part of doing business for the early group of Bitcoin pioneers who are paving the road to a different way of doing things altogether.
Well, and let's be clear about, and then I'll shut up, about what we're talking about. ICOs are public blockchains, right? So there's no board of directors. Nobody can fire the CEO. And that's never happened before. You go out and you say to the VCs, sorry, I don't want to give a 40% for $5 million of the company. I'm going to go raise $50 million by selling a product and control 100% of my destiny. And that's never happened before. And I think that's going to actually prevent the crash to the same degree that happened in the dot-com is when investment bankers and VCs came in and said, we're going to sell this for cash in the bank. Can't do that with a public blockchain.
This is the transitional tool from the centralized paradigm in its totalitarian iteration today to a decentralized balance between centralized and decentralized system. And these systems are the rails that will balance the equation between the two systems.
Bravo.
Nicolai, I'm familiar with Bitcoin Suisse from probably what it was years ago when it was quite a bit younger. In recent months, I've heard that you guys have grown, just huge and are doing tons and tons of business around ICO. Can you give us a bit of insight to what's going on?
Yeah, we're doing quite a lot now, but we focus on the financial aspect and kind of the compliant aspect. What we do is we go in and advise on the ICO itself, this financial tool where we see ourselves as the experts, how to structure this both short-term but also long-term, because your fundraising is not just laying in the fundraising aspect of period, it's laying in your asset class which you're creating. This is going to be what is funding you for the remaining many years. We go in and help them with that. Then we facilitate contributions, both for pre-allocating, allocating offerings, but also full ICOs, not just in a KYC compliant way, but also in an AML compliant way. And this is something I really emphasize the importance of, because I only know of one bank which is not asking for these things. The rest of the banks has two things on the top priority list. It's anti-money laundering, it's anti-terrorism. And for these projects and companies to succeed out in the future, it's the best to protect them. It's necessary to protect himself and be prepared for the regulations which come. And I think it's very, very important to do this and do it compliant. It might take longer, it might be a little more, but this is what we have to. This is how we keep this financial tool active in Switzerland. Then we help them store their asset class afterwards in a very, very safe way, because when you're doing an ICO, when you're raising massive amounts of funds, you're becoming a highly exposure person. Everybody knows you have million. And with crypto, as we know, it's pretty hard to get back once it's first stolen. So there we go in, we handle millions and millions and hundreds of millions on a monthly basis in crypto assets, and we apply our high security standards to help the ICOs. And then afterwards, which is the most important thing, because the ICO, a lot of the focus nowadays from many ICO entities, they're calling themselves an ICO. No, you're an entity, you're a project, you're a company or foundation. The ICO is a financial tool. That is not what you are. And if you're focusing on that, then you shouldn't do it. But then afterwards, we go in and we help them do wealth management. We go in and help them diversify their asset into different asset classes, lending out their assets, liquidating their assets into fiat, and help them being their financial partner also after they've raised these funds.
Excellent. I wanted to jump to you, Andreas. This is going to be an interesting question. I remember meeting Luke Muller, your sort of lead on the blockchain topic, 2-3 years ago, and he was very passionate about solving a lot of these best practice questions, making sure that the legal questions around ICOs were being addressed for a long, long time now. I've only just recently started to hear of other law firms getting involved in ICOs and blockchain more broadly. How do you look at that? Is that a healthy thing to get more law firms involved? Is it a small market and going to be tough to keep everybody involved? And if they are going to get involved, what sort of best practices do you think law firms need to be aware about?
Well, I mean, basically, of course, there are always two ways to look at things. The economic way, which you don't want competition, and then the best practice way. And we really looking for the best practice way. We welcome other law firms to do that. We also are in contact, we exchange ideas, because if Switzerland wants to be one of the leading jurisdictions for this form of funding, it can't be only one service provider in the legal sphere around there. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work because we can't handle all the cases. It doesn't work because we can't establish best practice all by ourselves. We need others who challenge us. We need to challenge others. We need the regulator to challenge us, and vice versa. So this is the right way for Switzerland, definitely. I think the other question you asked before, maybe what is a successful ICO and how do you do that? From our perspective, obviously being advisors on legal, tax and compliance issues, we tend to look at it a bit different. For us, the question, what is success, is not measured in numbers. We have seen very successful ICOs on a financial level, which have been unstructured to a far extent, probably not compliant with many regulations around the world, but of course they have a lot of funding. So you can say it's successful. For us, the successful ICO is just a mean to fund a project. It's a project funding. So at the end, success is if the project is successful. So, we see a lot of startups. We have, they get a lot of funding, but on the execution side, they need a lot of support. So our task as a law firm and a tax consultancy firm is not only to help them get the funding successfully, but it goes far beyond that. It's a lot about governance structures. It's a lot about contractual support, getting the right contracts, not being exploited by service providers. So I think the success part comes after the ICO, not with the ICO.
And the post-service to the ICO that you guys bring to the table, I mean, I'm still working with them even almost a year after one of the companies that we did a token sale for. I think it's important to say that in Switzerland, MME has been an absolute leader in the space.
very flattered. I mean, there are obviously other law firms who do great services out there.
Yeah,
So.
it's very Switzerland.
No, but as I say, I mean, it's been for years and for quite a long time the only firm. So full credit to MME for the leadership they've shown. Arie, I wanted to segue into Blockhaus. What was the inspiration to start Blockhaus? What do you see the value proposition really being in the context of the ICO process?
So I think you've said most of it already. I think that there is an opportunity to do it right in a systematic way. Mm-hmm. So my background is in banking, so I just chose to adopt a banking model. So I go from origination to distribution to post-secondary market maintenance, you could call it. Mm-hmm. So we've created together with MME a process called the token generating event, because we don't necessarily like the term initial coin offering for many reasons. We could do a whole panel about why.
Right, yeah.
But we originate, we want to create an environment where people are welcome, so people can complete certain due diligence questionnaires that we would add value, and we would like to build a community in front. There are some people that should be sent to several places because they may not be entirely ready. And then there's a process of doing workshops, which include a lot of legal preparation. In my particular case, because of my economic background, I like to do an economic study of the economic models, the monetary policies, the economic incentives, and the alignment of the feedback loops and self-referencing systems that we create with these tokenized ecosystems. Many of the deals that we are curating have the potential of being disruptive as economies themselves. And so I believe that if you get the economic model right and you get the economic incentives correct and the monetary policy is right, you have a much higher chances of success than if you didn't. Also, good idea, good product, good team, execution, leaner starter method, all the freaking Y Combinator stuff, and who are you, what do you do, what's the promise you deliver, all those things need to be in the right place, the story has to be right, you have to weave the future back to the present and then go there. And then we have also, I'm a little disappointed that we didn't meet before we started Blockhaus, because I would have saved a lot of programming. But we have a little bit of a TGE in a box. At the end of the day, we have a full KYC, AML, Spider, PEP, OFAC, all that, which we also do. I don't touch fiat, so I don't do the last mile deposit into fiat because I don't want to touch money. All of the transactions that we do through our token generating event are done through smart contracts, and all of the tokens are swapped without any human activity. And then at the end on the post-market side, we do market making, market taking, and liquidity provisioning. On the other side for asset management. And from the perspective of the distribution, once you're out there and you're actually operating and you're sitting on all this money, there's an opportunity for you to actually run your business as a tokenized ecosystem properly. So you should probably be incentivized to use your token as a means to pay your staff. So Singular DTV, together with Centrality, have put together an application called Paycheck and Blockkeeper. Zach LeBeau, the CEO of Singular DTV, a co-founder company of mine, and I, together with MME, Andreas, Thomas, and Centrality, have created an application to allow people to pay themselves in Ether and be fully compliant with Sage 55 and FINMA, in addition to a Blockkeeper scraping tool that will allow you to monitor all the activities of all of the wallets of all of your people. So this is probably a way to further enhance all of that which you've already done. You've set a tremendous roadmap here, all, and this is just another mousetrap.
A better mousetrap.
A different mousetrap. It's not better. Okay. I have to say it's not better because we are a startup. So I don't have the benefit of 3 years of track record as Blockhaus.
It's better for the people who got paid in Ethereum when it was $7.
Yeah, well, that happened to Singular DTV at $13.50.
Yeah.
There you go. I do have a couple more questions I wanted to ask, but is it possible to get a few audience questions? Do we have a microphone for that? We have a question ready, it looks like, or two. Why don't we take these two questions and then we'll switch to the other side quickly.
Do you hear me? Hi. It's Kamil Pszorsky from Experty.io. I have a question to Arie, because Experty is also working on a TGE, token generation event. And you mentioned that you doing KYC AML and all the people who want to participate go through the contract. So I'm interested how it's done, because I understand how Bitcoin Suisse does KYC AML, but how make that possible in the totally decentralized way. I know there are some options, but I'm just curious about your opinion.
Thank you.
So we've developed an application that takes the sales process from the point of the token being generated to the point where the buyer submits their token into a smart contract system and swaps for the token that they're buying. So the distribution network makes available to the purchasers of the token the mechanism by which they swap. And so the actual buyer is buying the token at the moment of the sale. And this is done through a KYC AML process that precedes the purchase. And we have multiple ways in which we can do it. There's a way of issuing a QR code that allows the buyer to then redeem the tokens when issued. There's a way to do it on the spot. There's a way to do it in a combination of ways. If we do a pre-sale, we do a pre-sale with an actual token, not with a voucher or with a SAFT. It's an actual instrument itself, so the sale is final. Happy to discuss it. We're using a matrix of 36 financial standardized contracts to issue these tokens because the work of our monetary economist, Willy Brammertz, and the work of Actus have distilled the global work of capital markets into a matrix of 36 financial contracts. And we're using those to actually build the instruments that could provide a more creative way of solving some of the problems that we have.
How do you perform the origin of the funds on Ether and on these crypto assets which is being sent in?
All of the KYC and AML at this point is done both manually and automatically through either technology or actually somebody validating the process internally.
We had another question. Yep.
No? Ah, okay, sorry. I'm working for one of the most collaborative organizations in Switzerland. I have a question for you. We see the mountains, you know that you have the Matterhorn as well. There is a blockchain lab in Valais. There are a blockchain techno evolution in Neuchâtel as well. And I wanted to know if you collaborate with these regions and which are the Swiss banks right now offering solutions for ICO projects? Because I need to have some, let's say, answers to foreign companies who would like to come and settle down their business in Switzerland.
Maybe bank account question first.
Yeah, as I see it, there's currently two banks in Switzerland, one based here in Zurich, Zürcher Kantonalbank, and one based in Zug, Credit Suisse. These are the two, from as I see it, who are helping ICO entities. And then there's, of course, some banks in Liechtenstein and, of course, some Singaporean banks.
And the second question was about bridging between for those not familiar with Switzerland, there's something called the Roche-Graben, the divide between the French and the German sides. And I think that question really speaks to how does it affect the blockchain ecosystem.
I can maybe answer that from the legal part of the exchange. And yes, there is an exchange. There are some legal service providers in the French part of Switzerland. Not many, though, in this field, but we're in contact with them and we're in exchange. But obviously, being Switzerland, we tend to focus on our own regions. That's kind of an old tradition, but we're definitely open to any. So if you have additional questions and want to brainstorm, happy to talk to you afterwards as well.
Yes, another question. So my name is Philippe Monnier. I represent here a startup called Arie, as well as a newspaper, La Gefi. I have a question to Mr. Glarner about the legal form. Could you comment? Some companies choose a foundation, you have LLC, you have a corporation, you have cooperative, you have a combination with holding. And could you also comment on the particular case of Ethereum? It's a foundation, then they injected money in an LLC, on the LLC is being dissolved. So could you maybe give
I
us some
obviously
explanation?
can't really comment on cases we worked on in detail, so I would leave out the second question. But with regard to the first question, what structure is the appropriate one for your project? I certainly could not give you an answer out in the blue, but in principle, what we love about the foundation structure is it really, you can look at it as like a smart contract, basically. It's rock solid. It has one input function. It has an algorithm inside, which is the purpose of the foundation, which defines for which purposes and which means the funds of the foundation can be used, and that's it. So the funds which flow into a foundation, they're secure, and so it's a very trustable organization. Nobody can run away with the money or misappropriate the money or use the funds for any other mean than for the project without risking to be involved in a criminal investigation. And the foundation is being supervised by a supervisory authority. That's a federal authority which does regular audits. So this rock-solid nature of this foundation really serves well for projects that intend to maintain, we always say, infrastructure level. Some new protocol, for example, or some application protocol, which shall be maintained and live for a very long time and not be controlled by a single entity which can change its mind and suddenly say, well, no, we stop that. So for projects like Ethereum protocol, Tezos, or you name it, all the base layers, the base infrastructure of our digital economy, we believe that is the right structure. The disadvantage of that obviously being it's not too flexible, it's not meant for commercial purposes, so that's where the limits are.
Thank you. Probably, yeah, Eric? We can probably take one more after this, if anybody has something burning.
Thank you. Awesome panel, by the way. Really enjoying this. I also enjoyed Arie Levy Cohen's beautiful description of a society in transformation from, I think you used the word totalitarian economy to a distributed economy. And in that transition, there are certain building blocks that we need, such as brokerage and security. I'm glad to, you spoke, Nicolai, about securing the tokens, the ether, once they'd been received. Kind of important, so much is being stolen. In the brokerage part, which is why we still have to pay people salaries in projects before they will take ether, what's needed to improve the brokerage part, or is it perfectly satisfactory at the moment?
Well, I believe we have an opportunity to build an avatar that is better than the current one that's operating. From a financial point of view, at the fundamental level, all that which arises from the business of finance is going to change. Fundamentally from the bottom up, because we have an opportunity to build at the meta layer, we have an opportunity to build regulatory, legal, tax, and compliant basic building blocks that allow for anything that plugs into that to be inherently compliant ab initio. And so then the burden of compliance and tax gets left to a more creative design of economies, which is a more beautiful practice of law, other than just the law that the regulators lean on to modulate society. It could evolve. So with finance, having an opportunity to create this potential continuous real-time auditing substrate on top of which regulatory, legal, tax, and compliance can be overlaid, and then eventually at some point we'll have identity and the cryptographic security. Anything that goes in there, everybody can go back to playing instead of being afraid of the regulator. And
we're already getting there with identity with the Civic and the XID tokens.
Correct. So I think that to your point, you have to go back to the beginning, because the opportunity is to transition into a balanced system where centralized servers will do what they do best, which is protect, delay, prevent, slow down, and ensure that there's maximum control and tightness. But the Internet of Things and the transactional layer that belongs out there cannot be run in centralized systems. They have to live in a decentralized world, and that's where we can add an extra layer of rigor to that universe, which today exists in a Tower of Babel, because the entire derivative markets it's a different language. You can't understand anything that has been produced because the standards for producing all of the instruments have been not there. The languages are different, so you can't communicate, so you can't analyze, so you can't really grow and scale exponentially. You arrive at these boom and bust cycles.
And decentralization is only one of the key features of public blockchains. I mean, for example, identity. You have a token that has identity. You can stop filling out all these forms. You have your token. You insert it everywhere. I mean, I can't say how many times I have to repeatedly show the passport and do this and prove that I'm an accredited investor. You have a token. It's on an immutable blockchain. And you're done, and that's going to be permeating many other parts of regulation and society.
Yeah, it'll transcend banking.
It's efficient.
It's efficient, and it'll allow us in banking to go back to doing banking.
We're running low on time, so I can't take one more question, unfortunately, but we'll be here for a moment afterwards. I wanted to try and end with a little bit of a spicy question. You don't have to name names or give specific examples, but if each of you could maybe give one example of something that you've seen in the last year around ICOs that you would recommend avoiding. Is there anything that comes to mind? Any best practices of what not to do?
The DAO.
Okay, yep.
Oh, I have various examples popping in my mind, but certainly don't copy another project and don't copy everything which was on the webpage. Mm-hmm. This was probably the most hilarious I have seen.
Plagiarism is bad. Okay. Yeah. Arie?
It's very hard for me to boil it down to one, to be honest with you.
Okay. Michael, anything from, say, social media or communications that's a big red flag or something people should avoid?
I guess astroturfing, but for the most part, I think that social media has a tendency to react to fraud, right? And sometimes overreact to perceived fraud. I mean, we represented an ICO that was completely, utterly legitimate, and they raised, $5.5 million back when Ethereum was worth a lot less. They had it was a great success story, match pool. And when they got funded, they brought in a new CTO. And the co-founding CTO got really angry about that, and he wrote a thing saying, in fact, actually, you guys were involved in this.
I know.
And he said, I'm out. The CEO probably did an exit scam because I called Bitcoin Suisse and they didn't approve it was a 2 of 3, and 2 of the 3 did. And it was like, all of a sudden, it was just a rumor that literally got wildfire. Mm-hmm. Cointelegraph printed as if it was fact. Some very big people on social media just said, it's a real shame that the scam still happens. Yep. And man, do we have to do crisis control on that. And finally, CoinDesk wrote a big piece called The Scandal That Wasn't. So social media can be a blessing and it be a curse. And I think everybody has to just, basically look for the truth like you do in any other field. Yeah.
We've got 10 seconds. Last words, Nicolai.
Not focusing on just raising as much as possible budget and stick to that.
Yeah.
Great.
Maybe if I can use the last 5 seconds.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, just remember, you're sitting in a glass house. That's the picture you should have. So every move you do will be transparent. People will see that, and listen to the lawyers which tell you things because you pay them to do that, and don't ignore them.
Get the most from your money. Great. Well, on that, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panel. Enjoy the apero.